Hey, what's up, everybody? Melissa, she said,
Hey.
"Oh no, what are you? Oh no, and you can't. Oh no, we're about to start." What's up? We're hosted by. We're hosting. I'm here with Melissa and Keith, and we are hanging out on YouTube and in Gather. Let's see what's up, Gather. We got the folks hanging. Oh no, I gotta turn off the iPad. We got the folks hanging out in Gather with us as well. Everybody, if you're in Gather, say what's up. Let's give a little shout out to everyone on the stream. No,
Yo.
there was a motorcycle. Anybody else? Hello? They can't hear us. They're not paying attention.
It's hard to hear.
Hard to hear.
A little bit.
Damn it, I got the volume all the way up. Y'all are tripping. What's going on here?
There you go.
Okay, maybe that'll work a little bit
Oh
better.
no,
I thought I
this is
fixed
not a
it.
good start.
All right,
Yeah,
well, we're going to
have
cut out
crazy
Gather then.
move.
Whatever. We're just going to be here in the stream then until we get up in there. We've got week 2 of Flochella happening here. Melissa, Keith, what's going on?
Not much. Super excited for round 2. Last week was absolutely crazy. Learned so much from Joseph, Nicolo, and Joe Moore. Yeah, very excited for round 2. We got Grace Walker, Koi, and Youssef. I'm very excited.
I'm sharing in the chat to join the stream for the pregame. I think the folks inside of Gather, come join us on YouTube while we're hanging out. So Melissa, you wanted to recap last week. What did we do last week?
Yeah, so it was, first of all, it was incredible. I think I learned so much, and I actually had to rewatch it a few times because I was just looking at it from different perspectives. And yesterday was the first time that I actually was paying attention to their advice and their point of view. And one of the things that we were talking about was how do they make these designs universal? And these guys specifically, they have this touch where they grab elements from the real world. So Nicolo, a piano, or Joseph, a car, let's say. And they create this UI elements that come from the outer world or the physical world, and they add them into their designs in such a beautiful and seamless way that you don't even notice, you don't even know what you're looking at, but you know that it's a piano, and you know that it's supposed to be a car speeding or something like that. So I just loved that part of the conversation. Apart from that, we spoke about how they get inspiration, how they keep themselves current, and it was just so great. I just loved it. It was awesome. How about you, Keith?
Yeah, I loved it. First off, learned so much from them. Listening back was kind of crazy because we were right in the middle of it, asking questions. I didn't really catch all the things, so I definitely had to listen back. One of the main things that stood out to me is that these guys are very good at what they do, but they're also, have their own insecurities and stuff like that as well. They get worried about their portfolios. They get worried about the work that they do. They look at it a bunch of times and find things wrong with it, just like everybody else. And I think that was a key thing for me, just to notice that everybody has those things that they notice when they're, or those issues that they come across when they're building or being creative. And yeah, that was very valuable for me to see that those people also have that, because they're just so good at their craft. And you kind of just imagine that they're just endlessly awesome and don't have any insecurities about any of that stuff. But yeah, it was good to hear.
I love that point of view, actually, because I actually was talking with a few people this week, and there's just a lot of big names going around in Twitter with beautiful work, and a lot of people have been feeling a lot of insecurities, and a lot of intimidating. And I just want to highlight what you just said, because it's just so important to know that everybody has insecurities. Everybody's working on their portfolio and they can't figure it out. And it's just a process. And then the other thing that I took away from this conversation is that 100% you can be a master designer. You just have to be disciplined. The fact that you are a creative doesn't mean that you cannot practice every day for an hour, keep yourself open to look at inspiration, art, and other visual things that catch your attention. You have to keep your eyes open, as cliche as that might sound, and just keep practicing, and that will take you to the top. So some people started before, some people started after. Like Youssef said, I've been doing this for 10 years. And this is where he is now because he has put a lot of work on this. So there's a lot of opportunity for people to really be successful in this industry.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that was the cool thing for me because I don't hang around with the design side too much. I'm doing a lot on the development side, and so as a design school dropout, it was cool hearing some of the same stuff that I used to deal with as an artist, and I still do like to dabble in design, but obviously not as high a level as Joe Moore and Joseph Berry and Nicola. So it was cool to spend some time getting just deep into their minds and that whole process, and it was a lot of fun. Inside of Gather, super fun. You know, there's always like a couple awkward moments with audio and different things, but the experience inside of Gather is just like so much more authentic. It's like being in a real space, and so just that whole experience of it was an absolute blast. Here's Youssef on screen. I don't know if this was what part of the stream he was in here. We could turn it on and listen what he's talking about here for a second.
Powerful, impactful, bold. Illustration, these kind of small little indicators like, oh, I like illustration over photography. Oh, I like bold instead of soft.
Yeah, so it was literally just, hours of them diving in. And I think we're going to get that exact same thing today. I'm excited to hear from Corey, Grace, and Youssef. I actually don't know much about Youssef. I've seen him on Twitter a little bit. I obviously know Grace, and Corey I bump into quite a bit. But Melissa, Keith, tell me a little bit about what we're going to expect today as we meet the new round of designers. And maybe we can check in and see what's happening in Gather here in a second.
Yeah, today we're going into a more structured conversation and not so abstract, because this group of designers are really focused on providing websites for clients that just have specific needs. So I really want to keep the conversation very straightforward, how they create these designs. And one thing that it's very similar between all three of them is that their designs are so clean. And I really want to learn about that, like how they're able to come up with these designs. The structure is going to be the same. So creative, layout, and then idea, and how everything comes together. But the conversations are going to be more straightforward and less abstract.
For sure, yeah. And I would definitely love to dig into I feel like this group definitely deals with a lot of client work. Maybe a little bit less than the people last year or last weekend, sorry. So I would really love to figure out how they use their creativity within the bounds of the client's goals versus just more abstract things, like design heavy side of things that we kind of discussed last weekend.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't know if that deserves one of these. But it's going down. I heard you in your Webflow show. I was like, yeah, go with the siren. Get him, son.
We need it. We need it throughout the whole show.
It was so much fun. I know. Okay, so look, I got them prepped up here inside of Gather. I told them we were coming in and we were going to do a screencast. It's kind of tough if you're watching in Gather and on YouTube, so I do have two mics. We've been having some issues with people in Gather being able to hear me, so I've got a temporary solution, and I'm going to work how to route my master audio through. But let's give everyone a shout out. Everybody wave. You're on screen right now on YouTube if you're inside of Gather, so give the folks on YouTube a shout.
Up?
And feel free to unmic yourself at this point. We can hear you.
You take all the points from that brief and you make sure that you
got
nail
Joseph Berry talking in the background.
So if they...
Okay. The wonders of trying to do so many things at once. Okay, so if you're hanging out with us in the YouTube stream, come hang out with us in Gather. The links are in the description. If you're in Gather, we're going to be on YouTube for another few minutes. Corey, Grace, and Youssef, if you're in this space, you should be headed towards the auditorium. You're going to be on the main stage here shortly, and we're just going to hang out, and we're calling this the pregame a little bit as we get into this. We're just recapping a little bit of week 1 and letting people know what to expect in week 2. So we're going to step out on Gather. Feel free to join us on the YouTube stream for the next 15-20 minutes, and we will be kicking off the event shortly. All right, so we're back to just stream now. This is like some hybrid digital event shit right here, you know?
That's what I'm saying. Like,
Yeah,
kudos
so
to
awesome.
you and your production.
Melissa,
Hey,
maybe you
Drew.
should talk.
I'm here.
Maybe you should talk a little bit about the after party last weekend.
Okay, guys.
Got
so
out of
it got a
control.
little litty. I mean, it's called the Webflow party. Like, we're all happy people. Like, we're down to party. So the whole setup for the event happens in Gather, right? So we created an auditorium where the event happens. But then afterwards, we created a little Flochella club with like a little virtual bar and everything, and everybody got their drinks at home. So after the event, we walked to the Flochella bar, which is that one that shows up right.
I'm pulling it up. I'm showing them walking to the bar right here, so you can keep talking while we're showing it.
Yeah, so that's Gather Town, basically the metaverse, which is totally mind blowing. And we did a club called Flochella. So when you go into a full blown bar. So everybody had drinks, and we just started like having fun, talking about 1,000 things. So the event ended at what time? Like 3 or something. And then we went to the bar, and we stayed there until 7:30 p.m. And we ended up like tipsy building a codfish pizza landing page.
So good.
Well, we didn't. Joseph Berry did, and it was amazing. And everybody was just like, add a fish, add this, add that. Like, it was just so funny. So if you're down to party, I would suggest you joining the Flochella after hours.
That's right. And we didn't record this because we didn't want anybody to feel like
No.
Once we broke into happy hour, I was like, yo, let's turn the cameras off here.
What happens in the bar stays in the bar.
That's right. What happens
Yeah.
at Flochella?
Yeah.
Listen, next year we have to do this live. Like, this
Oh, my
is
goodness.
such a good event that we just have to do it in person.
Can we talk
Oh, yeah.
a little bit about these comments real quick? Hold up. Brianna is saying, Melissa, you look beautiful as ever. That shirt. And Keith and I were both saying we got like potato sandwiches next to
Oh
this.
yeah,
like-
dude. It always happens with Melissa. She's just like up here. I'm just chilling down here. Yeah, like she slays it every time.
Sorry, guys.
And also, we were joking about, can we talk about sweet potatoes or not? We were talking about this before.
Yes.
Because these
Sweet
two
potatoes
had
are good.
a whole sweet
Sweet potatoes
potato
are good.
thread on Twitter the other day, and I was telling Melissa that I like certain sweet potato preparations, but not a lot of them. But apparently Keith is a super sweet potato fan. So
Yeah, I'm just a sweet potato guy. What can I say?
Oh my God. Have you ever tried regular potatoes with,
Yeah, of course.
well, I know you have, but like regular potato truffle fries. Oh my God, with Parmesan cheese? Hell yeah, that's
that
where
sounds
it's at.
I'm all about it. Yeah. I mean, I take potatoes in all shapes and sizes. I ain't picky.
That is true.
I'll eat all of them.
Pop off in the YouTube chat if you're here. Nigel's saying, what's up? Warda is saying, excited for today. Tio, let's go.
What's up, everybody?
Yeah, Eric Odom is in the house. Brianna, what's up? Kabarza is here. Corey Runnels. Mark
party.
Zeburn. Yeah, the whole squad is here. Josh Lowe. Shout out from Gather. Yeah, there's 2 places you could be hanging out with us right now. People are just starting to join into Gather, so we can show that screen right now. People are starting to hang out and get inside of here. We will be jumping into Gather shortly. The speakers should make their way to the main stage. So Grace, Corey, Youssef, you should all be on the main stage. Once we get everyone in there, we'll jump into that. Do we have everybody in there?
I see Grace up
Yeah,
there.
Oh, they
all
know
of
the
them are
drill.
there.
What happened is last time,
Yeah.
nobody knew the drill, so we had to like corral everybody for a minute. And we thought we were going to pregame a little bit. Well, it's up to you. Should we just jump right in and let y'all kick off do you want to jump off of here and then jump right into there? Or what do you want to do?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So from this point out on the stream, what we're going to be doing is Melissa and Keith are going to drop off. So whenever y'all want to do that, that's cool. We'll just go to, see y'all later.
Yeah.
Okay. So now it's just me and the stream here, and we're going to turn this up and see what's happening inside of the Gather space as we go. And this is just,
I think they're wrapping up the
this
YouTube
is just going to become basically a screen share at this point. So for anybody watching who didn't join us last time, you can join and gather. That's the most immersive experience. But if you can't, and if you want to watch this later, this screenplay will be available for anybody who wants to watch that into the future. So we're going to go into the program already in progress, and we'll leave it at that. And be sure to leave a like on the video. And if you like seeing live events like this, whether you're watching now or in the future, leave a thought in the YouTube comments for us as we go. Otherwise, we're going to go back into the Gather space now. See y'all, everyone.
I'm excited to be here. Hi.
What's up?
I was so glad you sent me the link, Melissa, because I was about to search through all of Twitter to try and find the Gather Space link.
I know. I thought about it and I'm like, wait, let me send them the link because maybe
I saw
they'll
Keith
have it.
post it earlier, and then I was like in the circle, and I was like, I don't know where it is.
Yeah, I know. Corey, I'm so excited to meet you at last.
Yeah, ditto.
What's up? Great to
What's
meet y'all.
up? So excited.
Thanks for
Thank you.
having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming, man.
Yeah.
Youssef as well. What's up, buddy? How you doing?
Hey there, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Hi, guys.
We
How you
can't
doing?
see you though.
I know I haven't had a webcam for about a year now.
Oh.
It's too much work. It's way too much work. Think about it.
Oh my God, really?
Fair.
Alternative in so many ways. We got the Figma opinions, no webcam. We'll talk about that.
I can't wait, actually.
Yeah.
Okay, Keith, you wanna start?
Yeah, sure. So, hello everybody. Super stoked for today. Hope you guys checked out last week. But yeah, we're in it today. Very excited. We got Corey, we got Youssef, and we got Grace. Just three awesome people in the Webflow space. People we've all been paying attention to on Twitter and just seeing all their work and stuff. And we're very excited to dig into their brain today. So I'll just chat quickly about the structure. Basically, we're just gonna have three stages. In each stage, we're just gonna ask a series of questions, give everybody on the stage an opportunity to answer those questions. And then we'll dig into questions from the audience following that. So we got three stages. First stage is creativity exploration. So just like the initial stages of how you guys start your projects, basically. Stage two is going to be layout exploration. So just like how each designer takes their whatever they brought to the first stage, the creative set of things, and how do they just start laying things out. And then stage three is just how it all comes together into a final product. So yeah, last week we kind of went pretty abstract with it, but I think this week we're going to be a little bit more structured and just try to focus on the main details and not get too, deep into the creativity side of things. I just love to hear how you guys work, and yeah, very excited for this. Last week was fun, and I know this week will be just as fun. So yeah, let's get it.
Yay. Okay, guys. So as Keith said, the first stage of this will be creativity exploration. And we'll just have 3-4 questions to really understand and go into you guys' brain, because we love how you guys design, what you create, and just how well you lay everything down. So we want to know the process before you actually do that. Before we start, Maria Martins, can you mute your microphone, please?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know it wasn't muted. Sorry.
It's all good. Yeah, I mean, if everybody could do that, that'd be awesome. Just to make sure that we don't have any feedback and they have rooms to speak and stuff like that.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so first question, guys. This is the one that we opened with the last weekend, and basically we just want to know, where do you get your inspiration from? And maybe we can start with Grace.
Yeah, sure. So many different places, and I think that's kind of the key to creating really well-rounded concepts, is looking for inspiration and reference in a number of spots. So typically for me, what that looks like for gathering creative reference is usually starting with somewhere like Pinterest, or there's like a few other kind of like visual reference tools that just to like gather, I hate this word, but like to gather vibes and like just kind of like pull visual reference and tidbits from other places. Also trying to gather reference not just from things online, but looking at like books that I have. Like I'm okay, for the first time in a long time, I'm doing like a print project. And so that involved like gathering out all of my design books and like going through editorial layouts and trying to like remind myself of that as well. So yeah, I think like the beginning stage of a project is usually just trying to gather as many visual references for the type of feeling that you're trying to create, and then distilling it from that point.
Yeah, I love that. How about you, Youssef?
So what was the question again, just to be clear?
So where does inspiration come for you?
Yeah, I would say it probably starts with, let's say I have a client and they have end customers or end users, what it is that those clients and users, or customers and users are trying to accomplish. So almost like leapfrogging the opinion of the client, unless it's rooted in what it is that their customer is trying to accomplish. And then distill that, which will then ultimately guide the direction of the branding. It would guide the direction of the treatment of elements, the components that need to be on a page or a website. So it starts very much at the end user of the work that I'm going to create, if that makes sense. So that would be then the springboard that I would pursue, let's say, conventional creativity, which is how we often describe like the look and feel of something, the branding, the sort of flair, right? And if it becomes apparent that that initial work that we're doing to figure out what the client needs or what their end customers or end users need is that they need something that's quite stoic and not particularly, rich with flair, then that would be where I get my inspiration from, right? So it's like an accountancy firm or like a kind of a serious, boring SaaS or something like that. But then if it's, a bingo for a bingo software for like elderly people, then that's where the point of inspiration would come from. So it always has to come back to who's going to be using or interacting with the design that I'm creating, and then kind of riff off that with the client and try to get some consensus on what they like, what we believe would fit that description. So it has to come back to who's going to be using the thing that I create, or it's not already create, but like design at the end of the day.
But
I'm so excited I skipped over all of my client research.
But I actually
like,
want to know where do you go before that? Like if you're doing a bingo software website for a client, like where do you get the bingo elements? Like where do you go to find those references?
Yeah, okay, I think I know what you're getting at, but it does have to start with who's going to be using the work that I'm creating. So like, let's say we find out through the conversations with the client that it's going to be mostly elderly people who are maybe potentially impaired in some way, visually or in some sort of sensory way, then maybe we need to make sure that we use that information as a point of inspiration as we pursue like color palettes and typography, and then try to find other brands or other, companies that have perhaps succeeded in that way and riff off that. So it has to, like, I think this is probably something that maybe doesn't get talked enough about in maybe the design community, that creativity is only useful if it solves for the thing that the client is paying you to do. Otherwise, it's just kind of artistic and it's purely fun. So I try to always remind myself of that, because it's tempting to not do that because it's so much more free, right? It's like way more free. You've got to come back to what the client and more importantly, their end user or their end customer is going to be doing. So I tried not to like let that flow too far, you know what I mean? Into more artistic conversations, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, and I actually love that. And that's why I think that the 2 weekends were so cool, the difference, because here we're focusing more on the brand or the product, while on the last weekend we were going more on the abstract type of route. So Corey, I would love to hear from you.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely plus one a lot of the sentiments so far, especially just in rooting it in what are you trying to actually solve. I think the way I think about it though is I've gotten to the point now where I definitely still enjoy design. That's why I got even into using, Webflow and building stuff on the web. But in any given day, I would rather build things in Webflow. And I'm saying all this because I think building things has a lot more objectivity to it than subjectivity to it. So when I'm even gathering inspiration and things for like some kind of web design or even brand work, I try to pull as much objective stuff as I can as early as I can, even if that's just like lists in Notion of things that, again, examples, whether they're visuals or just like written words about like what the customer offers as value. And then I think on the visual side, like I'm pretty typical, I would guess, like Dribble, sites like that are great. And I usually like pull screens and things into Figma. I've also, in the last like year, I started working out of an office where I live here with a buddy that's a really good designer. And he has gotten me like reignited on what kind of Grace mentioned, like books. The whole office is just like riddled with all of these like design books, but then also just like old vintage, like super legit typography that was literally like hand laid and things. And like, even just as an example of like his flavor too, something he also got me back into was like tumblers are still a thing. I just dropped a link to his in the chat. Like, just like, I don't know, coming across some tumblers like this that you just scroll through that people still maintain. And it's such a wide gamut usually of any kind of visual design, whether it's like anything from typography and brand all the way to like clothes and architecture and things like that. But usually it's very interesting that you can almost get like, sorry, Grace, a vibe consistency across different tumblers. And sometimes like I'll even think of certain people that I've seen before that maybe that aesthetic would fit the kind of industry that the client, or even in my role on the team at Webflow, like that space, and some different explorations that have been done in that space. Like, yeah, thinking of it from that side, I guess, is always interesting, and it's helped a lot. Like the other thing I would add is I think the longer I've done this, the longer I realize from that side, I guess, is always interesting, and it's helped a lot.
Sorry,
like,
hey Jack, you gotta mute yourself, Jack. And Riley, I think.
How, like, how is this not a? Can we take it aside? How is this not a feature on Gather yet? Where like, you can mass mute everybody. Like Raymar, I think you need to like raise your hand with Gather. I'm pretty sure Finsweet has got to have one of their biggest like.
We've talked to their leadership. I've talked to their like head of product. I've told everyone. I'm like, how do you not have just a button that mutes everyone in the room? So yeah,
yeah.
Yeah.
Also, how funny is that you got interrupted by yourself?
That's what I was like. Gosh, who is this nasally sounding dude that's like talking like really weird? No one likes the sound of their own voice, or maybe if you do, that's, I don't know. I can't relate.
You have to keep hearing it until you don't understand that weird.
Yeah. The last thing I was going to say before I interrupted myself was like, I think the longer I've done this, also the more I've realized that like too much inspiration can, at least for my workflow, is bad. Like I can get stuck in this hole where I like am just like, oh, all the inspiration, just like I want a fire hose of it. And then I get literally drowned and consumed by it to where like I lose vision of the, objective solution we're trying to solve here. Kind of what Youssef was saying. I don't know.
I love that. Guys, actually, there's people here that don't know who Grace, Youssef, and Corey are. So we missed a very important part
We
of
were
the
just so excited to
presentation.
start talking.
Yeah, I totally skipped over it, so probably could have gave him an opportunity to introduce himself. So
You're like, who
Yeah,
are
I
these
think we should
people?
actually do it because it's fair to give, each one of them their opportunity. So Grace, go ahead.
Sure, thank you. So my name is Grace Walker. I'm an independent designer and Webflow developer. I primarily do marketing sites, although sometimes delve into more kind of no-code complex projects. Occasionally dabble in branding, although I am trying to work with more branding designers because there are so many talented brand designers out there, and I really love just focusing on web design.
Youssef, go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Youssef. I run an unlimited web design subscription service specializing in Webflow. My early background is in graphic design, but probably the last 10 to 12 years, more focused on product design and web design. And yeah, I enjoy trying to design as cleanly and as clearly as possible. And I try not to treat design as a overly artistic pursuit, but rather it's a pragmatic problem-solving task. So that's me.
Love it. Corey, go ahead.
Yeah, Corey. I am in Des Moines, Iowa, in the States. I got into design because I loved video games as a kid. Thought I could make those with design. That was so far from the truth. And then specifically got into web stuff. Yeah, years back, discovered Webflow like 5 or 6 years ago. Changed my life because of just preaching the choir with that one. And then about a year and a half ago, joined the team at Webflow as a brand designer. I always feel I feel like a groupie that joined the band. Don't feel worthy, and I'm incredibly grateful every day there. And then I've always freelanced on the side. And then the last or about a little over 2 years ago, I met somebody named Alexander that runs Shapemaker, which is a small studio, and we've grown it from like the 2 of us to we have like 7 people now, and that's my full side gig, if that makes sense. Like that's the only thing I do on the side so that I can gate my time. I have a 3.5-year-old boy and a baby girl due in like any day now, so my time is very precious, and I'm very protective of when I'm working and doing different things, and so yeah, that's me.
congrats, my friend. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, congrats.
That's so exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you all for introing yourselves halfway through the first stage. Yeah. So yeah, I'll dig into the next question. So
One second, Keith. Can Terry get off the
Sure.
stage? Whoever this extra person Terry is, off the stage here, please. Just because the way Gather spotlights
Terry.
people and the way we're streaming. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, where was I at here? Yeah, so we're talking about inspiration. I'd love to hear how you guys use that inspiration to spark the start of your projects. So I'm sure some of you use just Figma or whatever design software you're doing, like mood board in there. But from like Twitter, I gather that Youssef kind of just goes right into Webflow. So I'm actually just super curious how all of you take your inspiration. You got the client goals, you're good to go. You got your inspiration, you're good to go. What's that next step, and what does that look like for each of you? Grace, maybe you can start.
Sure, yeah. I'm so curious to hear more about Youssef jumping straight into Figma, or straight into Webflow, no Figma. Yeah, I was so excited to talk about mood boarding and gathering visual reference that I completely missed that point that Youssef brought up so eloquently about making sure that your solutions are rooted in client need and a client goal and what the end user is actually going to use it for. So starting every project off with like a really deep discovery session about what we're actually trying to build before you ever get into any sort of visual reference. But yeah, I think once our goals are established, I have a visual direction or 2 or 3 that I'd like to explore. For me, the next step from there is to usually design out homepage designs. Typically what I'm doing is I'm doing 2 or 3 directions. So based in like existing brand elements, or maybe we're building out more of a visual language for a client. But I find the most helpful way to express the kind of full range of a visual design is to build out home pages for that. I think that there's a lot of ways that you can inject personality, different image treatments, show your framing options, your layout conventions, all within a homepage. So typically that's my first step in visual design, is to design out homepage designs. From there, we will make choices about what we like and don't like and want to combine, and then move into the full site design from there. But I'm always starting with a single page to establish direction.
Awesome. Corey, you want to dig into it?
Sure. Yeah. I'll specifically maybe speak from, again, like freelance life, maybe as more relevant, even just with probably more of the people here. So I think at ShapeMaker specifically, we always do like early. So even a little context there, we kind of end-to-end brand studio. So we do like all the way from like naming and strategy through brand work, and then web, digital, and so on. And so we always start in that kind of stylescapes phase. And by the time we get to like web design, where we're like in Figma specifically, big heart for Figma, and tools specifically, that like by that point we're usually pretty settled in the brand and direction and visuals, and even some of like the layout aesthetic and purpose that goes into ways that we lay things out. That we usually also do like a high fidelity homepage, and then all of the rest of the site is like what I would refer to as like mid fidelity wireframes. Like we'll still use actual typefaces, like proper layout and final intentions with how like structure and hierarchy comes together in each page, but like all black and white, no photos, nothing, as little things as possible as the client would get tripped up on along the way, I think is really the like ethos of the goal. To Grace's point, like you can get so much out of even just a single page visual, and how that will inform other pages, like simple things like button styles, nav, footer, things like that like, once you have those base things in place, it's really a lot easier to like rinse and repeat across the rest of the site. And then I would say like even gathering feedback and stuff usually happens in Figma at that point, or maybe Slack, before we move on to build. So again, probably pretty typical, but.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Youssef, I'd love to hear how you, take inspiration and start building or mocking things up. I'm assuming directly in Webflow. Like, I'm super curious.
Cool. Yeah. So basically, I've talked earlier a little bit about how we can establish a point of inspiration on the project, and that's really like low-level inspiration that has to be solved for. But when you start then moving over to the asset that is the website that we're trying to build, because that low-level inspiration could probably be applied to so many functions of a business. It's really like the job to be done, which is something else that I sometimes talk about. But back to the actual website project itself. So I'll typically start in a Google Doc. So what I'll do is I'll create with the client or not. It kind of just depends on the nature of the client and their capabilities. But with the client, we would then create, and assuming this is like marketing sites and not product design, we'd create essentially a list of all the pages, which then gets expanded into a kind of sitemap. So you can imagine, bullet points, sub bullet points, and then any links that need to be embedded, or any, further kind of expanding on what all of those pages are, what all the components are going to be, and then what all the elements of those components are going to be. So you could imagine like on the homepage would be one item, subpoint would be navigation, subpoint would be like mega menu, then a bunch of links, right? So you can just imagine it like nested bullet points, right? So it's all very text heavy. This doesn't need to be super big either, though. It simply just needs to be able to be a kind of written schematic of what a designer should be able to visualize, at least in terms of how this will be constructed, right? And then in order to merge that with some sort of look and feel or brand direction that the client wants to take it, then I would create a separate document which would start with a list of, maybe websites we like, the kind of stuff that Grace was talking about, images we like, things that Corey was talking about, screenshots from Dribble, whatever. Like, and it doesn't even have to be like related to the company. It can be completely unrelated. So now we have like a very high level description of what we want the website to be, and we have a high level description of what we want the branding to be. But there's obviously one thing missing there. You've got to take the actual mood board, if you want to call it that, and expand it. Now, by the way, that mood board could be built in Figma if you wanted. I just don't happen to do it in Figma. I just do it in a Google Doc because I'm boring. But I take that branding that they're liking or the direction, and then build out a kind of brand book or a reference book. And if they like that, then now we have everything we need to break ground on the website. So in essence, skipping Figma at this point and jumping right into Webflow, probably starting with the homepage, if it is the right page to start with, usually is. Start with the navigation, and yeah, build out in accordance with everything that has just taken place up to that point. So, you know, I'm obviously not going to kind of go into the details right now of how I build in Webflow or design in Webflow, but it's really not that different than what you might do in Figma. It's just you get the design and development at the same time, so it kind of on balance ends up, I think, being more efficient.
Yeah, that's super awesome, actually, and very interesting. You mentioned like a brand book. What was like? Is that like a style guide in like Webflow, or is it something else?
It's actually interesting you mention is in Webflow. It's something that I've explored doing in Webflow, because you could do some interesting things with palettes and the CMS and all that. But basically, it would be like, I'll give you an example. I have a client at the moment. They are in the backlink building SEO industry. They've got kind of an old brand, or kind of brand that just didn't really exist. They wanted to be able to elevate it. So we went through a process of kind of exploring what that would look like in terms of, you know, gathering together inspiration. And then I created a PDF brand book. It's really just like, it's almost like a lookbook, right? It's not even like to tell you that, you know, that we have to even stick with these colors, because once you go into the site, you might find that they need to be refined, or that we have to stick with this particular ratio with the mark and the logo type. And maybe on site it looks a bit off, so we have to refine that. So the brand book would be to say to the client that if you like this, you will like the site, but it's not to make any final promises about the site. And it will be a PDF, usually like 10 to 20 pages long, exploring what components might look like on the site, buttons, forms, potentially, you know, imagery, background textures, the kind of things that you're going to want to be able to reference once you're actually building out the site. So probably what I do, which is different than what a lot of other designers do, is I try to design a lot of the kind of timeless aspects of the project, which is the sitemap, the components therein, like the description of the sitemap, and then the visual treatments of things ahead of time, so that when I jump into Webflow, there's really like, there's no unanswered questions at that point, because, well, like the only unanswered questions are like maybe small details. They're not the premise, right? The premise has been answered. So in a bit of a long answer, but basically I hope that helps people understand a little bit more.
No, that's awesome. It sounds fairly efficient, actually.
Yeah.
No, yeah, that's
It's
super
very efficient. It's very efficient. It's what
I have
allows
a
me to run
question.
the business I run.
Based on what you said, because I think the controversy of so there's a controversy that, for those who don't know, that Youssef says that he designs straight on Webflow and jumps Figma, which is totally fine. And what he just said explains a lot of why he does it. It makes total sense. So my question to you is, what happens when you deliver, let's say, the first design idea of the website on Webflow, and then the customer has a lot of changes? Mm-hmm. What does that process look like?
Yeah, so so typically, like, if the customer has a lot of changes at that point, you have to ask, like, what are the changes, right? So if the changes are to do with the site structure or the page structure, then why wasn't that defined earlier on? So either that's on me or on them. To either learn, like for me, obviously I have to learn from that, get better at making sure that I get confirmation from the client. And if it's from them, well then, like, unfortunately they've changed their mind, and I guess that's fortunate or unfortunate depending on how you want to look at it. And then from the brand, if it's from them, well then, like, unfortunately they changed their mind, and I guess that's fortunate.
Room 4, could you mute yourself, please? Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, so that would be, so if the client says what you provided isn't what we want, but I'd have to know what it is. Is it the structure of the page? As I mentioned, it shouldn't be, because we should have figured that out. If we didn't, we got to learn from that. And then if it's the visuals, then what has suddenly appeared on the site visually that I can't reference in the brand book or the kind of reference book that we previously shared and collaborated on. So that doesn't happen, actually. To answer your question more directly, it doesn't happen. And if it did happen where a client completely changed their mind, well, then there's two outcomes. Either they're a little wacky, maybe, and they can't like settle on anything, and maybe they're not a good client, or it's a legitimate change of mind, and that's just a setback in the project, which sometimes happens. So it doesn't really happen, if that makes sense, in a that often,
Very interesting. I think you should teach us all, because I think that, that's one of the things that you sort of, that happens on Figma, because if you don't have a really detailed mood board and wireframe, lo-fi, hi-fi, and like all of that process, you expose yourself to be in the situation where you have to just edit a lot of things. So very interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I'm sure it works better if you're like fast at Webflow. Like if you change things pretty, yeah, like that probably helps a fair bit. So, but yeah,
it's how
I
you
want
get
to echo
fast.
also.
It's how you get fast. You don't need to be fast. This is how you get fast at Webflow.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good point.
Practice.
Yeah. I want to echo also Youssef's point about making sure that you have a sitemap early on in your project. If that's not the first thing that you're doing, it's often the first thing that I'm doing after we have a kickoff and a discovery session, because it negates a lot of those conversations later on when you're talking about like, oh, well, I want this other additional section. And you have a reference to go back to where you've already mapped out the intention for all of your pages, the content for all of your pages, and you can have that conversation hopefully earlier on in the project. Obviously, like I think that there's ambiguity in every website project, into a point where like when you're in the design or you're in development, you realize, oh, we need this other thing, or we want to do something else here. And there's always like a little bit of that. But like Youssef said, like rooting your design and your process in a purpose and a sitemap in particular makes the design and everything else just flow so much easier.
Yeah, one other thing I would even just, I don't know that it's adding more, just calling it out as a +1 again, it is that like a metaphor of like, getting approvals and buy-in from a client is a stair-step process, not like this big jump. And like I remember, many times in past experiences where I was early in my career, and like I used to have this like excitement about like I thought, the process should be like this big surprise moment of like I did all this design work and then I'm going to bring it to the client, I'm going to surprise them, they're going to be blown away, it's going to be epic. And if anybody has ever tried that, you will know that it's not 100% every time. You will have times when it does not hit, and it then hits emotionally deep, right? Like and I think the point in saying that is that like, even what I think Youssef is getting at is like there's so many little approvals and growing things along the way that by the time you're to the build, or in this case design and build at the same time, like the buy-in should be there. And if it's not, then like one of those other stair steps was missed, or maybe even miscommunicated. And it's, I think for me at least, it took a long time to realize how valuable that is, that stair step kind of approach and getting buy-in along the way. Whether you're with a client or in-house team, it doesn't really matter. I think it's critical to take steps that way. So yeah.
And more frequently that you're talking to a client about what you're doing, I find leads to a better outcome. Having regular check-ins, talking about what you're doing, and getting kind of like buy-in as you're going.
Totally. And even having like a way to document the buy-in. Like I know something we've been trying to do more at ShapeMaker even is like we use Notion for all project management notes and all that, and trying to have more of a client-facing surface in there so they can even see the clear like places we approved this and that and this other thing and the date and everything. So there's this like, very transparent layer of like, look, we agreed on all of this, and this is how we arrived at this point. And hopefully we never have to look back and use it. But there, to your point, Grace, there's always those unexpected things that come in, you know, days out from launching a site, and they're like, oh wait, we didn't include this part. Like, what? How did we miss that? It's like, I don't know. How did we? Like, yeah.
Yeah, but I would probably say that as like an addition to that, I would say probably there's a framing that can be done as well that's helpful. So I never ask a client for feedback. I ask them if they have any questions. And the difference there is you're not entitling them to actually decide like immediately what happens, right? Like ultimately you're going to defer to the client, but like you have to, because if they insist that something has to be done, you know, what are you going to do? Just say, no, your business has to be different. Like, no, it's not your job to do that. But the framing, if it starts with, hey, have you got any feedback for me? Then they're going to come up with stuff to say. Like, they're just going to tell you that they want this different, that different. So I usually ask them if they have any questions or any thoughts. And I often talk about consensus as opposed to approval. Because what you don't want, think about it like this. You don't want to be the doctor that gives a patient like a bunch of options and says, well, what do you think? Like, that's not what you want to do. You need to use your expertise and establish correct framing with the client that you know probably better than they do, at least right now, right? Maybe like broadly on the project and everything else, like they understand their business needs more. You can't assume to know. But when it comes to like just the daily grind of, like you said, like getting buy-in and getting buy-in from the client, like how you frame that can dramatically change like the fluidity and the smoothness of the relationship. And I found that using those techniques is really helpful at just making everyone feel like a team. It's partially why I like doing a retainer with clients, because it just feels like you're part of a team. There isn't this like tension around billable hours and you know, like project rates, where then if the client does change it, it's a mess. But anyway, yeah, that's how I like to do things. Just the framing be a bit more, I'm the authority, you've hired me for a reason to do something you can't do. I don't say that, obviously, but you know, you're implying that.
Yeah. What about like, so you said that somebody in the chat here on YouTube asked this question, and I just wanted to answer it just because we're talking about this. When you present the brand book and you present components that you're going to use, do you create them on Figma, or is this something that you just like, how do you create them to show them?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I actually, very old school, I have a Photoshop template that I just replace different components with newer components that make sense for that brand. It's like a PDF template, if you think of it like that, and I could just export all. So I mean, you could definitely probably use Figma for that, and it would be a little bit faster because it's very fast. Photoshop isn't, but that's just because I'm on the Adobe suite for other stuff. So kind of a template that gets reused, but obviously, like imagine there's like 20 or 30 potential pages in this template, maybe like 25, but I'll select the ones that make sense for this project. Like if this project, it's important that we know what form styles are going to kind of look like, then I'll generate those. And it's actually intentional that I don't want them to be super like, here's the pixel dimensions of the rounded corner, here's the exact drop shadow that we want to use. It's just tonality. Like, is this directionally something that you would be happy with? And get buy-in super quick within like 2 weeks or a week, and then combine up the sitemap and like jobs Oxo. We don't need to like get approval on pixel perfect designs at that point. The Webflow, I mean, the whole premise of Webflow is to be a visual code editor. Like it's to be what Figma's, at least as it pertains to web design, is trying to be. Figma is more than web design. It's for other things too. But I think using Figma for web design is just like ensuring you're still in 2004. It'd be like designing in Photoshop. Like, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I think it's just on Figma, I think it's useful when you're creating shapes and designs that you need to export as an SVG and then add them to Webflow, because sometimes you can't really, make specific curves or something like that, but that's awesome. Yeah. So the last question in the creative exploration stage is, how do you deal with creative block? So we can start with Grace.
Always starting with Grace.
We're always starting here. No, I love it. Yeah, I think what's really helped me with creative block is just setting myself up to be very disciplined in how I create. I'm not an artist, and I think, like, back to Youssef's point, like, design is more of a science than it is an art. There's obviously like a creative component to that, and you need to have like a free flowing mind in some aspects to create really beautiful visuals. But I think by and large, I try to prioritize discipline over motivation when I'm creating things. So if I have creative block and I just think, oh my gosh, I'm like, even in functional things, like I don't know how to do this layout, or I'm not sure how to lay out this piece of content. Usually it's just kind of like a typical reset of going outside, going for a walk, going for a run. I find that, and in talking to a lot of design friends, like this is quite common. Sleep helps me solve so many problems. So when I'm experiencing a block and I don't know how to do something, or I know that there's a solution, but it's not coming easily, it's usually just leaving that. And that's development too. Like I will wake up and I have dreams about how to solve a component, or I'll have a Flexbox nightmare. It goes both ways. But yeah, I think just like stepping away from your work, your mind processes things in different ways when you're not actively trying to do something. So whether that's like, I think about a solution on a run, I wake up and I have a solution for something. It's often just space from it. But by and large, just setting myself up to sit down every day and be creative is just more of like a mindset than a motivation thing.
Yo, I kind of want to steal this analogy of discipline over motivation, because super +1 in my realm. I think like yes, and also even the sense of like I don't really see myself as an artist. I see myself as yeah, just like I like to be very practical and system oriented in the way I approach things, and so like blocks happen, but sometimes I think I always defer to like what's the simplest thing I can then solve if I'm blocked on this more complex thing. Like even I guess a little context on my like preferences, what I like to do. Like I also feel odd as a designer sometimes, because like I don't like really sketch or paint or any of that. Like if I'm not designing or with my family, I'm probably like wrenching on stuff. Like I'm a big gearhead, love cars and boats and that kind of stuff. And so I'm probably in the garage building things or modifying things, which is, again, very just like you run into issues, you run into things you don't know how to solve. So you go and if you need to keep moving, you work on something you do know how to solve, and maybe that will then come back and inform the other thing. So I think about design in a very similar way. Yeah, if there's even things like layout that, you know, I'm just not feeling like I'm coming up with the most unique, original layout of something, then even let's just do the most basic layout with text on the left and image on the right, and just keep moving into the next section, and then knowing that I can always come back to that. Like, I think even that concept is what's interesting. And like when I've helped people learn Webflow, even, it's a common thing I say a lot is that, like, you know, build it this way for now, you can always come back and change it. And I think maybe it's even like subliminally comes from university videos where they say that quite a bit as well, that like iteration is very powerful to make sure that you don't get stuck. Just always remind yourself you can keep going. If you're stuck here, you can go somewhere else over here. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great advice. Youssef, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I don't really get creative block. I think it's because I tend to start much simpler with what I try to accomplish and then layer on ideas. So it's more like if there's a need to be creative, it comes like after the more pragmatic layout decisions that I'm making that have to be made, right? Like kind of like what Corey said about like if you're in doubt, right? So he's kind of going from looking for creativity, not finding it, and then coming back to basics. I kind of start with basics, and then if I encounter any like little neat ideas or kind of like creativity as a subsequent to that, or subsequently to that, I should say, then that's a win, right? So like the framing is not that this project needs to be super creative. It just needs to be pragmatic and work, and it needs to make money for my client. If in that we discover some cool little creative thing that we can do, then that's a bonus, right? That's how I take it. And that's like my sensibility, right? It's my personality. So it kind of means that you always can remain productive and don't get creative block, if that makes sense. Where there's probably some creative block, because it is a creative problem, is when a client wants you to do something that maybe Webflow doesn't really do, and you've got to like figure out how to make it work. Like a client of mine recently needed a pricing calculator. I tried to figure out how to do it with JavaScript. I could get it half working. So I was trying to be creative there to figure it out, and I couldn't get it working. So I just tweeted about it, and some developer was able to build it for me. So there's sometimes technical creative block, if that makes sense. Yeah. Then you just pay someone to do it.
Yeah. Youssef, I'm actually in love with your point of view. Like, it's very smart. And I think like we've been doing things wrong our whole life. and I mean, because, you know, it's very systematic, like you said, and you start from a very granular, oh my God, guys, my Spanish.
Granular.
Yeah, whatever. You think.
I got you, girl.
Thank you. Level, and you go from there. You know what I mean? Like, it's at the end of the day, everything it starts from something very basic, and once you have the foundation of something, it's easy to break away from that if you need to be more abstract. Like I love to design things that are very abstract. So having that point of view, I think it's going to help me actually in the future to create something from another thing that is just there on the basic level.
Everything big comes from something small, right? Like it starts off small.
Exactly.
So you got to start small and then trust the process. Like if you start a business and you wanted to be making whatever, $1 million a year or something, and you're shocked to hear that it didn't, and it's within your first year, and you know, you're so downtrodden about it because it didn't happen for you. I mean, you'd be delusional, right? So we know that, right? But it's the same with design. If you're expecting that this, like the first pass on something is going to be amazing, you're setting yourself up to fail probably. But if you assume that, okay, if I can at least get the first pass on this, like structurally correct, like the layout correct, at least like the button is there, like people can click on it and it'll take them to the pricing page or whatever, then awesome. That's like a win, and then build on that.
Yeah. I think like I think this is for everything, for business, for design. When you start a business, like you said, sometimes you get super excited and build this whole business model and like pricing strategy, and like you don't even know if people want that. So starting with something super basic and growing from there organically is super smart.
One last thing I would say one last thing, a useful heuristic is that if you're trying too hard, like if you're trying too hard, you're making it too hard, right? Like just go simpler and easier, even if you're kind of uneasy about it because you don't think it's gonna, like, is this gonna work? Like when I started Design Dash, I was like, is this even gonna work? You know, and like it did. So you have to sometimes just take a leap with something that doesn't feel finished or complete, and let like the tide take you, right?
Love that.
Great advice.
Yeah. Okay, guys, so let's open the floor. We're done with stage one, creativity exploration. So if there's anybody on the audience that wants to unmute themselves and ask these guys any questions, please do. Retro, go ahead.
All right, I have a couple. So for Youssef, I was wondering, you have a subscription model, right? How does
Correct,
that work with having such a refined and detailed process?
Well, yeah, could you just expand your question a little bit to make sure I answer it right?
Yeah, so your process seems like it's going through a process and then ending with a finished project. How does the pricing, like maybe it's if you don't like this question, it's okay to skip it, but how does it work that you offer like a monthly fee and you just keep adding new content, or how is it monthly fee during the process? I don't really completely understand how the subscription model works for what the refined process you have.
Okay. Yeah, I think I know what you're asking. So because the process that I have in place is quite you've used the word refined. It's quite specific. It allows me to be pretty good at being able to predict what's needed on a project, and I try to be as upfront as possible with clients, so that they can understand that and that they share in the expectations going into the project. So I will explain to them some of the things that I've said on this call to do with the process that I like to take. Don't expect me to work in Figma, et cetera, et cetera. So what I try to do is select clients and work with clients that understand that process, value it, and are happy to participate. If they are, then typically that is a client that we can work together at a pretty good cadence. And, you know, my clients will vary from a 1-month subscription where we'll, you know, knock out a new landing page or a couple of new features on their site, to maybe a indefinite subscription, right, where I'm a member of their team. Or, you know, maybe a 3 or 4 month subscription where we need about that much time to do a 4 or 5 page kind of maybe kind of advanced marketing site with a bit of branding or something like that. So it's the process of refinement is so that I can leverage that, if that makes sense, going into a project. I hope that answers your question.
In a way it does. But it makes me ask, like, why would you not just go for a set fee? If you know what the scope is going to be, thanks to your process, then you could go for a set fee, especially if you say you have like subscriptions for 1 month.
Well, that's a good question. Sometimes the client doesn't want a subscription, so I'll just approximate how many months I think we'd be working together and bill as a set fee. But typically I like the set fee, the project monthly, the monthly rate rather, because it removes any of the adversarial kind of nature that can arise when projects change or clients, you know, are slow and like they're kind of dragging their feet. They want to get on more calls, and that wasn't in the statement of work when it's a fixed rate. So it's kind of an insurance policy to make sure I get paid correctly. But to some extent,
it being a subscription model, like, or the name that way, doesn't that maybe like open up the door even more for clients to be like, yeah, but I'm subscribed to your service, so can't you do this? Can't you do that? Can't you do
that they might overuse it, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, the hedge against that is that a lot of our clients underuse it, so it averages out.
Yeah, true. Fair enough. All right. A second question I had is, I've seen like the product hunt badge on your website. How does a journey go? The product hunt journey go? Like, how do you get on it? What do you get from it? What have you like benefited from it? Do you like suggest it to people building models like yours? What is it like?
I have no idea if it helps. I just put it there because it seems like something that people in tech, because that's a lot of my clients, they see and they go, oh, he got some social approval there. It's a bit of social proof, you know, like 56 people, it's not a lot of votes, have given my service enough vote. Most likely they're just people who follow me and they want to be supportive. But it's there to imply social proof. I mean, it's real, like 56 people did do that. So maybe that means something to someone. But in terms of like launching on Product Hunt and expecting something from that, I don't really have any experience. Like,
all right, fair enough. Okay, then I have okay, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, let's just give more opportunity to other people. Yeah, thank you. So Corey on YouTube has a question. So we're going back to creativity. How long did it take for you to refine your creative process to the point where it worked for you and your clients? Do you ever find yourself changing how your process works based on your client? And maybe Corey?
Totally. That's a great question. I would say the shortest way to answer it is the process is never done. And I don't think I've still gotten to any point where I'm like, I got it. My process is bulletproof. No client can ever phase me ever. That is not real. I don't think, like, because even if you consider that like tools, whether you use Webflow, Figma, Framer, doesn't matter, Scratch code, like they change. And that's honestly part of the reason that I love the digital space so much, is that like, ironically, when I was in school, the degree I have is more in print and business than it is digital. And I just love digital because print hasn't changed a lot in hundreds of years, and digital changes every few years. And so I think I'm saying that because anytime I've ever had the thought that like, sweet, this new process works great, I can take on any new work, is when inevitably we'll have a client or I'll be on a team that just doesn't fit with. There could be, simple examples like even organizing content and things. When I discovered Notion a few years back, I was like so excited. And the full-time team I was on at that point was like very corporate-y, and the IT team didn't want me even having Notion on my work computer at all. And so there's things like that, like when you consider your process and creative process, it relies a lot on like tools and experiences. And so I think like if I even had to give a rough answer on like when, I would say like, maybe, I don't know, 2-3 years out of school that I had maybe enough project experiences, both in a full-time gig or side projects, that I felt at least confident enough to know like when, different things need to happen, and also how to react to feedback. I think was another, important learning curve that like, as much as words can harm or get you excited, at the end of the day, like you got to be objective about it, and don't let your process drastically waver because one client decides to treat you or act differently than another. Hopefully that helps answer it some.
Yeah. Anybody wants to add anything else to that question? No. Okay.
Yeah, I think I'll just add quickly onto that. I think as a kind of like concrete answer, yes, echoing what Corey said about like your process is never done. You're always learning things. You should always be learning things. But as kind of like a concrete point, I think 2.5 years after I started working as a designer, I felt confident that I could design a website, build a website, receive feedback in a thoughtful way, give feedback in a thoughtful way. I feel like that 2.5 year mark was when because 2 years I was like, not really ready to go out on my own yet. But kind of like 2.5 years, I was like, yeah, I can do this. I know what I'm doing. I understand it. Obviously, like you're never done. Like I'm at the beginning of my career, like Youssef has been doing this for almost 20 years, it sounds like. And there's so many talented people who spend decades as designers, and that's my hope. But giving yourself time to realize that like you're not going to be good at something right away, and you need to put in a certain amount of time and volume in order to get to that point, and that's okay.
Yep, I love that. And let's just go to one more question from the audience, from Maria Martins. So she heard design as a science. She would love to hear about that. What is your point of view of why design is a science? And then after that, if you guys want to answer, is how do you deal with imposter syndrome? That's one of the topics that people love to talk about. And if you have any thoughts, we would love to hear them.
I think my process, do you want to go, Corey?
No, you go, and then I'll
Okay, yeah, I think we'll all have thoughts on design as a science, but I think like for me, design as a science means that there is a process, there is an answer. I find a lot of times with fine art, I was talking to a friend she's a fine artist, I'm a designer, and she says, oh gosh, I would never want to do design because like there's a right and wrong. And I'm like, I would never want to do fine art because there is no right and wrong. Like, and so for me, I feel like design as a science means that you can get to an outcome with a process. You know that there's a right answer. There are multiple right answers. There's often not just like one direction that is correct, but it's something that you can reach an outcome on based on conventions and established principles. And there is something that you will reach that someone says, yes, this is good or right. And like not often, like it's always fluid. I think design like is not fully in that realm of like concrete yes and no, but it's more so that than art, if that makes sense.
Totally. I think one way I put this that I did not heard somewhere else, was that like design provides a solution or an answer, and art provides a question, right? Art is about like, and art in the sense of like a painting, like maybe more traditional forms of art. that it's all about the person that creates it and their perspective on the world. Design is a, you know, a systematic approach, aka like the kind of metaphor of it being science. It's a systematic approach to then offer something that is, you know, selling a product, communicating an idea. It is a solution in itself. And so I think maybe the same person in the chat mentioned Nicolo, which huge fan. I think he's I'm probably like one of my favorite Webflow users ever. And I would say that the difference or the balance is that there is still like artistry to design, and it varies at different levels. And Nicolo, you know, I would say my opinion on a lot of his success is because a lot of the work that he does embraces artistry, and it's for clients and things that are already in an artistic realm, right? And so he's like incredibly successful and talented there. But not all design exists in that realm, right? Like a lot of design still also exists in a much more practical, functional realm. Yeah.
So my question is, because I'm very curious about the creative process, you know, and I see people like, I work in marketing, so work like you do makes perfect sense to me. Is something that I would pay a lot of €1,000. And then I see someone like Nicolo Miranda that's like, whoa, what is this? And what gets me and what I still can't understand is that, can design be taught? And not everybody can be Nicolos. So that's, you know, that two perspectives is really interesting. And when you speak about designer as a science, it's really cool. And it's, for me, it's a mystery, you know, and it's these two panels are so completely different. This is awesome. And then, yeah, right, that's it, basically. I would love to hear you talk more about this, because this is a mystery to me. That's it. That's all I'm going to say.
It's great. It's great. One like little thing I would even add is on the can design be taught? Like, I think that's where there's a lot of nuance, you know, or difficulty. And like design is such a varying range, being the Nicolo example to other ends, right? That like, I think there is still a lot in design, and especially on the artistry side, that is somewhat reliant on talent or like your eye for aesthetic. Whereas like the functional part of design, and especially in the digital realm, like there's a lot more, I would offer there's a lot more like constraints in building things for the web, you know, like, and part of that's, you know, why I love Webflow is it embraces the constraints of the web being HTML and CSS. And so those functional constraint-based systems that we design within, in my opinion, can very much be taught.
So you don't get imposter syndrome.
Yeah, yeah, true. I mean, like, if you think about it, yeah, we all have the same constraints. We all have the same systems we're working within. So like imposter syndrome in that realm is like, you know, some people just see it differently than others. And that doesn't make any one way of seeing it better than everybody else's. It's just, yeah, a bit subjective, but.
I think being a lot of like being a good designer is also having good taste. And I'm not sure that that's something that can be entirely taught. And I think Corey kind of like touched on that a little bit of like your aesthetic tendencies. And so if you have really good taste, I'm not sure that that can be taught. I think that a lot of that is just instinct, but I think technically like you can train that, you can exercise that, you can practice that. And so you can always get better at it, but it's rooted in like, you know what good is. And even if I felt this a lot as an early designer, and like, I still feel it sometimes, like you create something and you know it's not as good as it should be, and you're able to recognize that. And I think that's your taste, is recognizing that it's not there yet, but you can get there.
Yeah, I think that that having the eye for design could be taught if you are always consuming the type of art or design that you want to create. So if you're there's a saying in Spanish that I know there's in English, but I don't know what it is, but it says, tell me who you hang out with and I'll tell you who you are. So basically, if you're always exposing yourself to high quality design, seeing what great designers that you admire are doing, eventually you will become that same design. You know what I mean? So it can definitely be taught.
Yeah, something that Nicolo said last weekend was that he gets a lot of inspiration from like cinema and like photography and a few other things. So like art in all forms, not just web design, I think can, help with this set of things to train that eye.
Exactly. And combining it with the education. So like how light works, shadows work, how color combinations work. That really gives you an idea of recognizing why something retro is not the same as something Art Deco. So it's just like a mix of things that are packaged together.
I think one observation I'd add to that I've learned about myself, and even when like helping teach others in the last few years, is a lot of those things, whether you get inspiration from cinema or you're trying to execute something based on inspiration, is attention to detail and intention with details. Is that like so much of good aesthetic and so much of good design comes down to these like tiny details and consistencies that like people early in their careers, including myself, it's like it's so easy to look past those, and it kind of comes back to the whole like like how's the saying go? It's like good design is no design at all, or there's other abstractions of that. Like the more you can remove, the better. But like the process of doing that is about finding all those little details and little things that are refined to the point where most people will never ever notice it, but they know, or they get a feeling or an emotion or an attraction to something being good. They just don't know entirely why. So that's where like experience and just taking your time and learning and observing and practicing design, I think is critical to like, refine that aspect of things.
Yeah. And they also part from art styles, so really like everything, unless you are somebody that's just ultra mega creative, that just created a whole new style, mixing many other styles into one. I know it's like a little bit of a mix of words there, but really everything comes from one style. So a type of typography could be, again, retro, and you can use that and mix it with something minimalist. So understanding that, I think it's very, very important. Okay, guys. So Keith, do you want to introduce the next stage?
Yeah, let's get into it. So this stage 2 is going to be layout exploration. So we kind of maybe touched on some of these things in the first little bit there. I'd love to kind of chat about how you guys, take this inspiration. Well, we kind of already chatted about that. Let me just dig another question here. How do you determine?
Maybe how do you ensure a unique experience once you lay down your layout? So, Grace, Corey, Youssef, you guys have such beautiful designs, and somehow they're just different. So how are you able to just create things like mixing hierarchy and layouts and animation? How does your brain work when you're doing that?
I vote Youssef.
If you go, or Corey.
I vote Youssef.
I don't want to start again.
Okay. All right. So the question was to do with layouts. Is that right?
Yes. So once you do your layout, how do you ensure it's a unique experience? Because your designs are just different.
They're not unique. They're not unique. That's just it. That I don't ensure that they're unique. I don't. You should go to my website. You'll see they're not. They're quite conventional. I try to rely on just pragmatism, right? Like if I was a visitor to the site and I am interested in getting videos edited from a video service that edits videos, I want to know what the name of the company is. I want to know their high-level offer to me. I want to know maybe some examples of work they've done. And I want to be able to make a decision because I've got a million other one things to do. If I'm like Corey, I've got a bunch of different kids and, I've got these other things. Like I don't care about the designer's neurosis in making it like animated and really slick and cool. it's irrelevant. It's totally irrelevant. So I just sidestep all of that, bypass all of that, and I go with very conventional layouts. Text on the left, image on the right, text above, image below, button to the left, whatever. Like just really conventional things, because it typically makes my life easier, it makes clients' life easier, it makes the end user easier, and like no one loses, everyone wins. So I actually don't try to create like fancy layouts. Now, if what you want to know is how do you ensure that is going to look good, right? Well, then you got to come back to like the basics of typography and contrast, and studying what would be good practice for display faces in order for them to be legible. The letters per line, line height, making sure the color contrasts are good. And I actually think that using Webflow's color algorithm that tells you the contrast ratios is decent starting point, but you should also kind of trust your eye and train your eye there. Look at what others have done. So making sure typography is really good. Making sure that the sizing of elements is coherent. The alignment of headings, if there's a bunch of different boxes and they all have headings, that the alignment is consistent. And like, obviously I could get into all the nitty gritty there, but basically just making sure that everything looks like it's been tidied and it's orderly and it's neat and it's well structured is what ensures that those simple layouts come together well. Kind of a half answer, because it's not possible to like articulate all these things in a 2 or 3 minute response, but yeah, do simple really well, and then I'm happy. Like my job's done basically.
That's great. I think, Youssef, you mentioned this earlier, even on the creative block part of like starting with the basics, and always just like moving up from there. I think on this question, like that's where that hits home a lot. Like an example is the team at ShapeMaker. I work with one other like Webflow dev. His name's Aaron. He's super rad. And something we talk about a lot is like, as we get into builds, let's save interactions and things like that to the very end. We will absolutely think about them in the early design processes on opportunities that we might be able to do something cool here and there, but we make note of it and save it, because like sometimes we've found focusing on uniqueness and get something like super cool too soon will send you down a rabbit hole that will destroy every deadline that follows. So like I try to be very practical about just knocking out things as quickly as we can that we know are the way to go, and they're even conventional and kind of tried and true. And then I think like for me, uniqueness and some of that also comes a lot, or like maybe not uniqueness. How about more like quality? I think the level of quality of a site for me comes down to what I mentioned earlier, like details and consistency. And so this is where I'm incredibly passionate about just like systems and like pre-Webflow, for example. I mean, I was like, I tried several different platforms, and the previous full-time gig I worked with did everything engineering wise on the front end with Bootstrap, which is a CSS framework that's been around forever, and learning from that perspective. And then now have always kind of built that way in Webflow with utilities and layout systems and things. It helps knock out a lot of the obvious. Somebody in the chat even mentioned this question of like building in Webflow, how do you accommodate responsiveness? And like for me, I think I just get so used to like building with a column system and that like so much of that is already kind of figured out. It's just part of the process. So it just opens up that much more time. Again, usually near the end of the project, where I can go back and look at places we can kind of refine things further, or even just like it puts in these guardrails and constraints that allows for even more ways to get creative within those, if that makes sense. Like creativity is like, for me, most easily accomplished when I have constraints to get creative within, versus just like, there's no rules and build and design whatever you want without any framework of approach is makes it really hard to execute at a higher quality. So
yeah. I think most designers actually make their work harder than the client. We have this idea that we need to just like create. Well, I thankfully don't do this anymore, but early in my career, I would have thought that I needed to be like particularly creative about things, and I misunderstood creativity as this kind of like whimsical thing, as opposed to like, it being actually much more in the nuts and bolts of what's going on. That's where the creativity is, and you can get a lot of satisfaction from that. And then, then you opt out of designing, rooms with 5 walls, like you just don't do that to yourself. Like just design 4 walls. Like no one's going to complain about a really well designed, logically laid out building, but everyone hates when you go into a building and you're looking at an apartment or whatever, and it's like just a weird angle. It's like, I can't do anything in that corner. And we do that. We as a community can do that to our designs, like ourselves. It's totally self-inflicted, and it doesn't need to be that way.
Yeah, I think kind of piggybacking on that, a lot of uniqueness I feel like can be selfish. And so in a project, when I'm trying to do something unique, I'll often stop and think about that. And I'm doing that for myself. I'm not doing that for my client. I'm trying to make something unique to push myself, and maybe like, how could I express this content in a different way? But it's like very rarely a client is saying, oh, I want to do a section that's never been done before. Like they don't, like, no. And so in a lot of ways, like, I think it's okay to balance that. And in some ways I try to do things that are unique on occasion, so that I'm pushing myself to like maybe explore different layout, or I see something that someone else has done and I want to replicate that to just expand my skills. But oftentimes that's a selfish thing. But in terms of the uniqueness of how a site looks and feels, I think it's often maybe a comparison between, is this unique compared to its competitors? Is this unique within its brand landscape of other industries? And a lot of that comes down to like what we've talked about detail, execution. Is the site just really high quality? Is it easy to navigate? Are you working with an industry that maybe that's not the norm, and that's how you can make it unique? So I don't think it's unique in necessarily like the grand scheme of every website ever. It's unique in like the subset of what it's being compared to.
Yeah. One thing that I want to note about that is that we are so involved in this community, and we are seeing all the time the signs that everybody's coming out with, and websites that are just so beautiful, that our vision is a little bit warped, because you guys design amazing websites. Like there's millions of people designing websites that are not even, acceptable. So I think that, no, for real, like it's the truth. Like you guys.
But it's also like, yeah, but it's also like I've designed and built like over 45 websites in the last 2 years. If I tried to make each of those unique, like I wouldn't be doing this anymore. Like what Youssef said, like you have to like establish conventions for yourself and like follow like rules and get back to basics. Otherwise you're gonna, like, I would lose my mind.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, I mean, we can't share all of our projects, right? Like there's just some that are just very basic.
Yeah, I think it's important to note as well that client needs don't always like translate to like projects that have like a lot of crazy things going on. What Youssef is saying is definitely very practical in like serving clients and just getting their goals met with a web design, basically. So yeah, I think it's very important points. Yeah, so I got another question. I'd love to hear how you guys introduce copy into your layouts. So like, how does that work? Do you guys usually do it in Figma? I know Youssef probably just does it maybe right in Webflow. I'm super curious how you guys do that.
Content? Go ahead, Youssef.
I'll go first. I'll go first because you mentioned me. Yeah, I just try to get it like, especially for pages that are going to be, the design is really going to be influenced by the content, like a case study page or something where you're going to come up even with a template inside of Webflow, and you need to kind of know what you're going to be working with, so that when the template's filled out, that actually it's going to the design's going to render well. So the earlier you can get the copy, the better. And then when you're designing, of course, you consider that. And the great thing actually, as it pertains to content in general, but especially copy when you're working inside of Webflow, is it's super easy to see, okay, well, what happens if I just resize the browser? Like, and I know you can do things like that in Figma too, but like, it's right there. So you can kind of see what it looks like. You can see how it breaks down when, like, things that'll, like, I'll try to tweak and get right will be if, you know, headline looks great on desktop, but then if you kind of bring it down to a smaller desktop, suddenly now you just get like a weird orphan or a widow, I can't remember what it's called, where basically one word on its own on a line in a headline. It kind of looks a bit ugly. I'll try and like tweak the font size for that, for the H1 in this case, maybe, to see if maybe I can just get it to sit better. So by having the content earlier, especially the text, the copy, you can really make sure that you're evolving the design in lockstep with it, as opposed to later in the project and you put in all the copy and it's like, oh, things look weird now. Like the headline looks huge because it's now got 3 or 4 more words than I thought it was going to have. So yeah, as early as possible is great.
Yeah, Corey, you want to dig into that?
Yeah, I mean, I think content is, at least in my experience, always the biggest challenge. And I, because of that, am always trying to strive for a content first approach, in that, whether that's on the team at Webflow, with clients at ShapeMaker, like, the reason we're making a website in the first place is to communicate an idea or a value or a product to somebody, and we cannot do that without words. Like, no matter how cool your visuals or whatever you make are, they're meaningless without words that actually communicate what's going on. And so even if that's like doing content in the sitemap phase, as an example, like one way we've approached sitemaps is in Notion, where, you know, you are just using pages in a list, and then that way you can like literally click on a page and then go to the page and maybe see like a high level outline of, you know, what headlines, subtitle, even like section titles would be. And it's not necessarily final, but it's at least like, here's generally what we will be talking about. And again, in an ideal world, content is like near finished before we ever even start at least the build phase. Ideally before we start the design phase. And knowing that that's not the reality and it rarely happens, like, I think the other power of Webflow in general, and one of the many reasons why I love it, is just the fact that we can at least start somewhere. And then, you know, a common thing I've worked with others on is like giving writers editor access, so they can get in and like literally paste in final copy or make edits along the way of the build. Especially, you know, that balance being, you know, that they're in the editor while I can still be in the designer, building other things, and that communication being increased because of it. So, yeah.
Oops, I unmuted myself, but I was already live. I think like number one best case scenario, like Youssef and Corey both said, is you have content already. Like that is number one going to be the best case scenario for everyone. You're designing purposefully for the content. That often does not happen. Content is the most difficult part of any project. I think something that I try to do, kind of like second case best scenario, is that you can map out content at a site mapping stage, and maybe you're having a copywriter work alongside you and you're having an open discussion as you do things. However, often what I'm ending up doing, especially for smaller clients that maybe don't have a copywriting resource or are struggling to create that content themselves, is I will write the first version of the site. And so how that happens is I try to never use lorem ipsum or placeholder copy in any of my designs. I always want to be at least putting intention into a copy block. So like, we have copy here, it's for this purpose. I'm going to write the first version of it. Usually that comes from sometimes their existing content. Maybe they have marketing materials already that describe their service, but we can kind of start that intention. I find it's often a lot easier for a client to edit something than it is for them to create it from scratch. So if we can at least get that first version, knowing that it's placeholder, but it's placeholder with intention of what that final content should be, I find that often like kickstarts us on a really good process versus just like waiting until a client provides a final copy. Because a lot of smaller clients, if they are running their business at the same time, or even they have a small team, like it is so difficult to ask someone to write their entire website unless that's like they've already been planning that for months and months and months. So I find that helpful for me.
Yeah, and I think that when we do that for clients, especially if they're all over the place, basically they're probably small clients, they appreciate that so much, and they end up going with with what you decided to write.
Even
Okay,
if you
guys.
sorry, one more thing on that. Like, even if you
Yeah.
are engaging with a copywriter, like I did this on a project. I did this for Yamavans, the site that I launched a few weeks ago. I had written the first version of that site based on their existing site, what we wanted to plan out. And then when they brought in a brand copywriter, we had a first draft of most everything, and then she was just editing. So it made her job a lot easier as a copywriter, which was great. And I'm also seeing people mention Copy AI in the chat, and like 100%, it's great for placeholder. Set the intention for your copy. Can be a really good starting point.
Mm-hmm. Okay, awesome. Let's open the floor for questions here in the audience. I have one question on YouTube and one question on Gather that someone sent me. So let's go to the YouTube one first. And it's from Juan Cardona, and he asks, I completely get where you're all coming from, building on top of the user's knowledge and being practical. But in what instance do we go outside of the box then, creatively speaking? It's a very interesting question because I also understand the systematic approach. It makes your life much easier when you're running a business as a freelancer or as an agency. But when do you say, okay, with this website, I just want to go crazy, you know, and like it will probably take me longer. What are those instances for you that you just want to go super creative on it? Like Grace, for example, the website that you did for the Vans, I don't remember the brand, but I feel like that was the one project for you where you said, okay, I'm letting my creativity fly. So is that because you love the project and you love the branding behind that they gave you, or how does that work?
I think if you're going to do something that's unconventional, and I wouldn't necessarily say like Yamavans is unconventional, but it is definitely like more playful than like a corporate site. But I think that needs to be informed by the client. And so you're reflecting their values in that, are they unconventional? Are they outside of the box? And so it's informed by that kind of tone. That, are you working with somebody like the magician site that I launched a few weeks ago for Theron Schaub? He's a magician. Like, how cool is that? Like, of course we're going to do something out of the box. And so that was like pulling in references from James Bond and like 60s Vegas, and like trying to do something that was not necessarily like a typical site, but was informed by his aesthetic and brand and all of that. So I think when you're doing something unconventional, it's because your client is doing something unconventional. And how you get there is pulling reference and trying to do things that are maybe at different scales and making big gestures. I think I often think about in web design of how can we make a big gesture here?
Yeah, one thing this question makes me think of is like, this is actually at the core of why the team I work with at ShapeMaker, why like we prefer to do end-to-end, and like our specialty is like early stage startups, because I think the way we approach opportunity is that we are not just like a service provider doing a beautiful design. We want to actually be part of like the thinking and strategy of like selling the product or value, right? And then how does like digital experiences and brand experiences inform that, or even like what is the strategy that can inform those things, if that makes sense. So like, I guess, yeah, the opportunity is like, we want to come in and we want to even like suggest and offer solutions on ways that they would market themselves and ways that they could maybe even evolve their product to fit with like a brand vision that we are helping them create. And then on the other side of that, even like my experience on the team at Webflow is, I think something unique there is, you know, we all like, especially the brand web team I'm on, we build stuff in Webflow for Webflow. And so we have this definite like deep connection with our primary customers. And so again, like thinking about the fact that we are able to bring more to the table than just like, here's how you make a layout. We are able to bring like, I don't really like, buzz phrases, but like design thinking is a common thing that you'll probably come across if you haven't already. And that really, from my understanding, it just gets to this core of like, we as designers can think beyond our tools and the things that we directly create to like strategy, and how does some of that inform and help our client, and even offer more value than maybe they were originally expecting when they just wanted somebody to build a site for them. Yeah.
Youssef, do you want to add anything there?
I don't think so, no.
Yeah, I think that I'm probably one of those designers that when I get a request from a client, I just want to like push it. So I think that it also depends on the type of designer that you are. If you feel like you want to be the designer that creates those type of designs, then you can be that person. It not only is on the client, because if you are offering yourself as someone that creates abstract designs, then you will get those type of customers. But if you focus on only designs that are just typical, then you will get that too. So it's like two sides of the spectrum.
Yeah. And I think that's something that like has almost become a qualifying factor for me when I'm taking on new projects and interviewing new clients, is trying to think about, is there an opportunity here for me to flex my skills or grow more, or maybe collaborate with another designer? Mm-hmm. Going back to what Corey said about their branding studio, being involved in that early strategy. I love working with brand designers because they've put so much thought and effort into the front end of things that by the time you get to web design, it's this beautiful package with conventions and typography, and there's still like play that needs to happen in the web design, and you still need to figure out how that's expressed. But it's so fun. And so like oftentimes when I'm trying to decide whether or not I'm going to take on a project, it's like, can I do something fun with this? Is there an opportunity to learn from someone? Is there an opportunity to collaborate with the designer? And those have become really key decisions for me to take on a project or not.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, perfect. Question for Youssef by Jose, I think Jose Arce, if I'm not wrong. How much influence from Eric Speakerman is in your career as a designer?
Yeah, that's a good question. So he's probably asking the question because I've tweeted about working at his company back in Amsterdam in 2009. And the main influence that Mr. Speakerman had over the work that I did, because he would sometimes talk to me as a young designer about some of the perspectives you ought to have, is that the client pays you to do something that they cannot do. And it's important that you remember that, but that you help them remember that. And the thing that probably benefited me the most from learning that and from hearing that is that it reminds you to not be so easily like kind of disappointed or offended or kind of like taken off course if something doesn't really work out or it's not working out right. And it also separates yourself from the client in a way that empowers you to hold yourself to a higher standard. Because what I think often can happen is that when you get into the mentality that you need to satisfy the client and get approval and please the client, inevitably you're going to encounter an awkward client, and you're going to misinterpret that as you being inadequate or not being capable of doing the thing they're hiring you to do, and really they're just not a good client. And if that happens early in your career a couple of times, which it definitely will, I think it can be very demoralizing for people. I think it's what creates this kind of myth, in my opinion, of imposter syndrome. People think they're not good enough because they put too much emphasis in what the client thinks instead of what you think as the person who does this every single day. And that was probably the thing that I learned the most from Eric that was really helpful at solidifying the confidence that I need to have in order to have a long, enjoyable career as a designer. So they're hiring you to do something that they cannot do. You may not be like very good at it yet, but you're still better than the client. Even your first client, you're still better than them because, well, they came to you, right? And you preoccupy with yourself with it every day, and you know things they don't know, even if it's just the technical tools. Like, you literally just know things they don't know. So to remember that, hold yourself to that high standard, and don't let what clients think derail you or offend you or, you know, demoralize you, which I think can easily happen when you're in the mindset that, you know, you might have imposter syndrome or something like that. I hope that's helpful. It's probably a loose response, but it's mostly what I learned.
Yeah, of course it's useful. I think it's great. Grace, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just gonna kind of like piggyback onto that. I've been dealing with a difficult kind of client situation this week, and it's been helpful to have confidence in how I'm handling it because of the volume of work that I've gotten through. And I think maybe first 2 years of my career, I would have been really shaken by this person's thoughts. But like what Youssef was saying, it's like, you do this every day. It is your job. People hopefully have given you really good feedback in most of your projects. And when you encounter something that's difficult, sometimes it is a one-off, and you have to know that like you're the expert and you have experience doing this, you do this every day. Like, it is like, you know what you're doing. And I really appreciated Youssef's thoughts there. And that was really interesting to hear.
Keith, go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, are we all good with questions? Does anybody else have any other ones before we move on to the next stage? You can put up your hand if you want. Retro, what's up?
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback of the questions about typography. Like, often when I'm doing a typography process, I'm looking to make nice pairings, but this process is something that you find inspiration of a nice pair, and then I keep them in like a dribble mood board or anything. Like, where do you guys find nice font pairings, or how do you get to that point?
I'll answer first. I very slowly and kind of like begrudgingly incorporate new typefaces into my like list that I like to use. I'm reluctant to quickly adopt new typefaces because I think a lot of them are kind of garbage. So I usually start with something that's very simple, and then if a project warrants something a little bit different, then I try to find something from a good foundry. There's tons of really good, high quality, free typefaces out there, so it doesn't mean you have to like pay a bunch for it. But I'm really slow to do it because it's that thing about like less is more, right? If you set a very simple standard for yourself, it's so much easier to accomplish it than if you just go out and like try to absorb every single typeface out there and every single combination. You're literally making yourself you're putting yourself through torture. It's that whole thing, the paradox of choice. Simplify it, give yourself a small list of typefaces you like to use, stick with those unless you absolutely have to change because the client's branding requires it. But stick with those, and yeah, slowly add to that list, and you stop thinking about it then after a while, and you just you just do your work, and then you get paid and you go and have fun. Like, you just don't make design your life, you know.
Wrong crowd, because basically that's our life.
I like, kind of to echo that, I had a professor in university who said like, you should be able to do any project in the world with like 10 typefaces. And I appreciate that sentiment, but I think probably like half of my projects, type has already been established. It's from a branding team. They've already decided. I'm not involved in that choice. If it's horrible, I can maybe suggest something else, but like, it's usually really, really good. And so if a brand already has type established, we work with that. When I am making typography choices, usually for body copy, I'm trying to, again, use things that I know and love that are variable fonts that have many weights that I could work with, that I know look good at various sizes. But for headings, it's really, I love searching for type and searching for beautiful typefaces. But I think it comes back to like the point where we were talking about like, when do you know to go outside the box? It's informed by your client. So Once you've kind of established the look and the feel that you're trying to go for, you then kind of have a direction of, okay, well, what are we looking for? Are we looking for like a classic serif? Are we looking for something that feels very tech and monospace? Are we looking for something that is a condensed sans that maybe feels a little bit retro? And so it's just trying to like notice those patterns and what that kind of typography, the voice that it emits, and pick up on that and pair things together. And sometimes you just want to have fun and explore things and figure out how to use something for a project. When you see a really beautiful typeface, I'm often on like future fonts, just like looking at what's there, downloading trial typefaces, just like exploring. Like, I think type design is so cool, and there's such detail that goes into it, that it's really just, it's not a scientific thing. Like, that's just fun. Sometimes.
There's one thing, sorry, just one thing I want to add though, to make sure that, like, to riff on what Grace just said, typography and typefaces is definitely something that every designer should be very curious about, and you should spend a lot of time enjoying it. But when it comes to the practicality of work, don't feel like you need to force an amazing typeface in, because that can be maddening. But definitely enjoy typefaces. You'll learn a lot about good design from studying typefaces. Definitely. Go ahead.
Yep. Love that. And I think that actually makes me think I would not self-proclaim myself a type expert. Like, I think even part of that is in the realm of like, I just want to build stuff in Webflow. Like, give me the typeface, like other teams kill it with branding and type. But something that I had this experience, I think this was in like 2014 or 15. I went to a How Design conference, and the creator, now I'm drawing a blank on his name, of Gotham, and many other like pretty famous typefaces, was there and gave a talk. And I was so excited, and I was like, this is going to be epic. He's going to show me all these creative approaches. And the entire talk was about math, the entire thing. Every aspect of specifically Gotham he was talking about was based on decisions of math and the ocular perspective of your eyeball and how it observes forms. And it was one of the first times that I remember thinking like, wow, like, this is just one in that realm of design being science, right? Like, there's so many very objective, practical ways that you can look at aesthetic and how it can define then things that come later and that are maybe more abstracted. And I think even in that realm, that's where I've always held on to like typography and even selecting typefaces as like it, it should be in that same realm, that like it definitely can emit a mood and it should align with the mood and vibes of the brand. But like, it also needs to be very legible. It needs to work across a large spectrum of scale and contrast. And those decisions should probably come first. Just because I think I've also had experiences where I've seen typefaces not scale, and like you picked them and designed them for like a website or one specific thing, and then the client's brand grows and they're all of a sudden doing other deliverables like embroidery or something, and it totally falls flat. And so I think even some of that comes back to where I also agree with the like less is more approach, and like per project, don't have too many typefaces in your tool set of ones you like to go to. Try to limit that as well, and found the decisions on which ones you go with based on really practical things and scalability. So, yeah.
I think that's like why we're here. Like that conversation that you just said you had, or you saw, I'm not sure, but that's what we want to know, or the people in the audience wants to know when we created Flochella. Like, how do you see different aesthetics, and like, how do you train your mind to be able to understand that? And, it's just fascinating.
Yeah, as you guys were like responding to that question, I thought of like I have this book here, like it's called Type Tricks. And it talks about all the basics of how a font is made, the visual composition, the skeleton of the font. Like once you go through it all and you understand how a font is made, you can really see that once you change your typefaces in your website, you can literally change like 60% of the style of the website.
Exactly, correct. Okay, so let's jump into design exploration, which is the final stage. And in this stage, we want to understand how you guys take layout and introduce the elements to create a final design. So just straight up question, what does that process of layout to design look for you, Grace, Corey, and Youssef?
So layout to design, like once I have content and I'm trying to like decide on a layout for the page.
Yeah, like once you're ready to go into Webflow and start laying things down, like what is your process and stuff like that.
Oh, so like beginning development process. Like the design is done, we want to build it.
Yes.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, for me, I am always starting with a style page. So I don't use any system. I know I'm like contemplated using client first. Sometimes my naming conventions are very similar to client first, but essentially like every project that I start, because my design is often or almost always custom, I'm building from scratch every single project, except for I have a project starter. So my project starter has a like basic navigation structure with a menu animation that I use in almost every project, as well as kind of like my type setup so that I can style the semantic headings as well as kind of like false semantic headings H1 through H6 so that I can apply like an H2 styling to an H1 or an H5 to an H2, like to cross over there. So every project starts with a style page, laying out all of our typography. I'll build the navigation and the footer first to make sure that I have kind of like my main components. And then sometimes I will start with a home page, but more often than not, I'll start with an interior page because usually an interior page has more elements that are going to be used at scale throughout the site. So like a modular component that I use on like 4 pages. So I'll try and start with a page that has the most components that I'm going to reuse over and over again to kind of scale the speed of the build. So oftentimes a build like starts very slow. I'm setting up all my styling. And then like once you have kind of your base components outlined, it gets exponentially faster.
Yeah, I can go. I mentioned this a little earlier. I've always, even pre-Webflow, built sites from the perspective of a system, whether that was something like, Bootstrap, or even at one point, I was so sick of WordPress and Drupal that I was just like downloading HTML, CSS, and JavaScript templates from Theme Forest, and I would just like, try to piece them together that way. It's usually starting on the style guide page, bringing in typography, colors, all that are specific to the brand. And then usually from there, building core components, like nav, footer, and then, maybe starting with the homepage, or even to Grace's point, I would agree with that. Like if there's like sometimes it's like a features page or something like that has a lot more core things that will be reused, then maybe that's the starting point. Yeah, and I think it's just for me, again, I can't express enough the systems that helps so much, because you can work very fast, and especially in a team. Like even on the team at Webflow, something we've been striving towards is having our own, defined system. We call it boilerplate. That it's kind of similar to like the ShapeMaker one in terms of just having like a column system and specific utility classes, not the whole gamut of utilities, but like core ones that are commonly used, and just like approaching builds in a very consistent way is just like mission critical for working on a team, because as soon as you don't, it just increasingly gets harder and harder, and like essentially you're creating tech debt. Which is so ironic because we're in a no-code space, but like there's a lot of things that you can still do that like tech debt that end up happening like you were coding anything else. So yeah.
Love that. Go ahead, Youssef.
Yeah, so probably, I covered a lot of this earlier in my process, because I don't go from Figma to Webflow, or from visual kind of tool like Figma to Webflow. So I just start in, I don't know how you guys start in Figma, but basically I start in Webflow the way I probably would if I used Figma, meaning I would drop in some components or some divs in order to start building initial components. I have a boilerplate that I use that helps me just kind of get the basics out. So, H1s will be styled and 2s, 3s, font sizes, and some grids already built and all that good stuff. So I'll kind of build upon that. But yeah, I mean, I just like the thing that people I think need to understand is that there's no difference between Figma and Webflow, except that Webflow allows you to actually build something that can be used in production. Because Figma is a web app, even the native app, and it's all just HTML and CSS anyway, except it's not rendered as such or utilizable, if that's the word, as such, right? You can just export it as a PNG or as a SVG or something like that. So for web design, even though I totally understand that Webflow is a bit more technical and you kind of have to, you can't just like drag and drop things where you want them to be, and you've got to set paddings, but those are really awesome constraints because they prevent you from making like mistakes in logic that you can make in Figma, right? So you're kind of forced to get it right quicker in Webflow. So it's a bit slow at the beginning, right? But then once you have it working, it's probably right. So anyway, that's me like rambling about my workflows. Basically, I work inside of Webflow. I design inside of Webflow. You can start with a blank canvas if you like. You don't have to have a boilerplate like ShapeMaker or like my own. You don't have to have that. You could just start with a completely blank canvas, start dropping in divs, set up your section, set up your containers. Always use divs. Don't use Webflow's pre-built components unless you have to, simply because if you use the divs, you just get full control. You learn quicker. You learn to understand how to control elements. You don't get too much proprietary injection there. And just start building out components. And once you learn to design in code, which is basically what Webflow allows you to do, it doesn't really make any sense to go back to any other way of working. So I encourage anyone who's listening to this, who's curious about it, who thinks that my take is a dumb take, to do it, to try it. It might just change your whole career.
Love it. Yes. I also think that that's, I mean, a good idea. The whole point is to try new things. And sometimes when you keep doing the same things, it gets to a point that you kind of get bored of the process. So it would be interesting to try it for sure. Okay, guys. So that is all. If anybody in the audience has any more questions, feel free to unmute yourselves and ask away. This is the last time these three guys will be together in a room. So, well, I mean, I don't know, maybe in the future again, but if anybody have questions, go ahead. If not, we are stopping the stream on YouTube and then going to the Flochella Club to hang out. And yeah.
After party.
After party.
Quickly before we go too deep, I'd love for us to take a quick selfie and post on Twitter, #Flochella. If you want, you can like hit F on your keyboard and just do a little confetti while we do it. That would be super awesome.
What's the dancing shortcut? I forgot about that.
Z.
So a little dancing plus confetti. It's a deadly combo. Okay. Everybody smile. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Bam. Look at all. You're all so cute.
Very good. Yeah, Corey said until no code conf. That is like my #1 priority for the fall is coming to no code conf. I'm so excited. Yeah. I hope everything's in person and like stays good. That'll be fun.
Yeah. Okay, guys, so that's it. Thank you so much for coming. Flochella was a total success. It was so fun. We learned so much from all of you guys. The weekend 1, weekend 2. Thank you, Youssef. Thank you, Corey. Thank you, Grace, for coming. Thank you, Finsweet, for hosting us here on Gather. You guys were so supportive. Joe and Raymar just gave it his all on this. So awesome. And Keith, my bestie, thank you so much for helping me put this together. And that's it. Thank you so much. We're not going
Thanks,
to
everyone.
sorry. We're not going to like we're just gonna take a break here, but the YouTube is stopping. Go ahead. You can say your goodbyes.
No, just thank you guys so much for organizing this. It was so fun, and I'm so glad to be included in it and hear from Corey and Youssef and everybody last weekend as well. It was awesome.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much. Honored to be up here.
Cool. Thanks, guys, for having me. And there's definitely more to life than design. So yeah, go out there and enjoy life.
We're about to do that. We're about to do that.
Design Twitter is not real life, guys. It's not real life. Anyway, cool. Awesome.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, guys.
So if you're watching with us on YouTube, we are winding down on this part of the event. Everyone will kind of take a short little break here and then head over to Club Webflow. I don't know what we're calling it, but we're doing a big Webflow party hangout in the big community space here. Actually, I'll walk you to it. So if anybody wants to see where people will be hanging out, if you walk up to the top of the space here and you go out into the world, into our gather space here, you'll walk past through the little town hall and you'll see right here we've got this low code or X Webflow party space set up for Flochella 2K22. You just pop in here and this is where we'll be hanging out. And so all of the festivities from here will be happening inside of Gather. We will cut the live stream now, and here comes the squad. So here comes everybody into the space, and we will go ahead and dip out from the live stream. So thanks everybody for hanging with us. We'll catch you next time.
Grab a beer for you.
Anything.